This is Aisha White interviewing Leah Lesser on the 12th of March 2018 at her home in Hall Green. Leah was born in Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia in 1931. She migrated to the UK in 1939 and then to Birmingham in 1948. Leah, could you tell us about where you were born?
I was born in a little place called Teplice-Sanov in Sudetenland on the 26th of March 1931, and I had a very happy childhood until Hitler came to power and things in Germany with Nazification became extremely bad for Jews, and we had to move from Sudetenland to Prague, a journey that took 6 months, and I went to 3 different schools until we arrived in Prague. On the 30th of June 1931, my parents took me to the station at Wilson Street Station in Prague, and I started on my epic journey to England. A journey that took about 36 hours. We crossed from Prague to the Hook of Holland by train. I don't remember anybody coming onto the train and throwing things around. Some of my friends did have people coming round, opening their suitcases and having nasty experiences, but I personally had no nasty experiences. And we landed in Holland, and I remember going on board this big steamer, and for the first time ever, I can remember this lady give me a strawberry jam sandwich on white bread. I'd never had white bread before. And we sailed from the Hook of Holland to Harwich, and in Harwich we caught a train to London, to Liverpool Street Station. We all collected in this very big hall and waited to be collected. I wasn't sure who was going to collect me, but although the person that was collecting me had been in correspondence with my mother, and she came all the way from the Isle of Anglesey, and she took me back to Anglesey, and we went on the local train to Crewe, and she says that Welsh sailors sang me lullabies on the way and took me to the local train to for Holyhead. In Bangor, we were met by her brother-in-law in his car, and we crossed Anglesey, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of July, and we went along this lane with 3 gates so that the cattle couldn't wander across and onto the road, and up 2 fields. It was a beautiful moonlight night, and I was beginning to feel very homesick indeed. But when we reached the bungalow in Heatherbank, there was a tabby cat sitting on the table, and I knew I was all right. And indeed I was. My guardian had 7 sisters and a brother, and I was treated like one of the nieces, and I had an extremely happy life. And toward the end of the war, my guardian, whom I called Mouse, her real name was Florence Hall, she sent me to a Czech boarding school, which was in Whitchurch, Salop, and then the school was evacuated to Breckenshire, to a little Welsh town called Llanwrtyd-Wells, which we stayed in this converted hotel until the end of the war. And all the lessons were in Czech, and I'd been sent to this school so that I could relearn my native language. And Mouse used to say, you want to learn Czech because if your parents are alive, you'll want to go back to Czechoslovakia. Anyway, at the end of the war, sadly, my family all perished, and I stayed in this country, and I was too old to be adopted, but Heatherbank was always my home, and all the family, we're still a family, and our children are also friends, and we stay with each other. And it's really, I was most fortunate because I never personally encountered any anti-Semitism anywhere. And I had an extremely happy life. And I always wanted to nurse. And when I was 17, one of my aunts was a health visitor, and she'd been a patient at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and she thought that I would like to be trained there. She thought it was a very good hospital. So off I went to the Queen Elizabeth, and I was trained and stayed on the 4th year just to experience more training. Then I did my midwifery, and after that I worked for 17 years at the General Hospital, Birmingham, where I did all sorts of specialities after my midwifery. I actually worked on the genitourinary ward, which was in those days was called Ward 19, because we treated venereal diseases there. And it sounded much better than saying that. And I did trauma, I did night duty, I worked on a surgical ward for many, many years. And then I got married. So I had 5 years off and had 2 daughters. And at the end of those 5 years, I thought, oh, I must go back to work and have some adults to talk to. So I actually did family planning for 17 years until I retired. And you had to retire on the day you were 65. So I retired. And I seemed to be busier than when I was working. And
oh, go
ahead. In those days you didn't have lifts, so I remember going up and down the stairs, and I remember that I had a grand piano which my grandparents gave me, but I never played it because we had to move. So I don't think I would have been much good, to be quite honest, but I never had the opportunity. And I don't remember too much, except we had a teacher that wasn't very nice to the pupils, and at that time I thought I'd like to be a teacher, but I soon changed my mind. But I can't remember playing with other children apart from my cousins, a girl cousin called Eva and a boy cousin called Harry. But sadly, they perished in the camps along with the rest of my family. And in Prague, we were there just such a short time. And I had thought that I had come to England under the auspices of the Children's Department, Refugee Children's Department. But in actual fact, I was one of Nicky Winton's children. And we didn't know this until a programme about 25 years ago, when Esther Ransom did a programme, and she said, now, has anybody else been saved by Nicholas Winton? And everybody in the auditorium stood up. Unfortunately, I wasn't there because I had at that time been contacted by one of my fellow pupils. But after that, we had, every time Nicky had a special birthday, we always met either the Czech or Slovak embassy, and we always had a great party, and it was really very, very nice. And he lived to be 106, and I'm in contact with his daughter now, Barbara. But he was a wonderful man, and he didn't think anything of it. And it wasn't until many years later that his wife found the suitcase in the attic, and in that suitcase were pictures of children and addresses, and he and his mother had arranged for these children to find homes in this country. And that's how I went to live with Mouse, Florence Hall, because Nicky had arranged it.
That's great. Could you tell us a little bit more about your family history and the cousins you spoke of? Do you remember anything about them?
Not very much, I'm afraid, except we used to play and enjoy each other's company, but we didn't live that close, so, I didn't play with them regularly, so I can't really tell you anything more than I've already told you.
Yeah, that's fine.
On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. The country was in deep depression following the Great War of 1914-1918. Unemployment was rife. The marginalisation of Jews began. Early in 1933, anti-Jewish legislation was passed excluding Jews from the political, economic, social and cultural life of Germany. Jewish businesses were boycotted. Children in state schools were harassed both by Nazified teachers and by other pupils. In September 1935, the Nuremberg laws were passed. Jews were stripped of civil rights and reduced to second-class citizens. On the 3rd of November 1938, Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, took place in Germany. There were pre-arranged attacks in many cities. The houses of Jews were ransacked and Jewish businesses smashed up. Synagogues were burned and holy books destroyed. Kristallnacht seriously alarmed the Jewish community in Germany, as it made clear that hostility to Jews was organised and unrelenting. Those who could make hasty arrangements to emigrate. For many, this was impossible, but some of these were able to get their children out of Germany by Kindertransport. So hopeless did the situation for the Jews in Germany seem, the parents were prepared to send their children into the unknown.
Can you tell us about preparing to migrate to the UK? What did you bring with you?
The only things I've got left now are my passport and 2 books from school. One is a Czech book and one is a Hebrew book. And also I brought a locket of Moses giving the books of the law. And that's all I've got from my childhood, because apart from that, all I had were my 2 big suitcases and clothes. And I grew out of those a long time ago.
So how did you prepare to migrate to the UK?
I didn't. I mean, I just went. What sort of thing do you want me to say?
How did you feel about coming? Do you have any memories around that?
No, it was just a bewildering time.
Yeah.
And I basically, I did what my mother told me.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the train rides as much as you can remember?
I can remember very little about the train journey, except we were sat in rows on wooden seats, because all the continental trains had wooden seats. And I think I must have slept, and I didn't know anybody else there, and I don't really remember anything. We must have passed through Germany to Holland, but I don't remember anything until we got off the train and boarded the boat.
What was your first impression of the UK when you got here?
Well, bewilderment, because I was in this great big hall and I was one of the last children to be collected. and we all had labels with our names round our neck, so that people knew who we were, because you can imagine a trainload of children. Some were babies in arms, and some had the siblings with them, but most of us were like me, just travelling alone. And so I was very relieved when I was collected. But of course, my guardian had such a long journey, and in those days you didn't hop into the car, and we didn't all have cars to travel in. So it was a long wait. And of course I was homesick for my parents, and it was a sad time until we actually arrived and I saw this tabby cat on the table. Yeah. The next morning when I woke up, Partridge Mouse, she had her sister staying together with her little daughter, Jane. And Jane had carrot red hair, and she had it all done up in curlers. And I never seen anybody done up with these rags all over her hair to make her hair curl. And I was quite surprised, but we became very good friends, and we're still very good friends now.
Do you remember anything about the weather or the food when you first came to the UK?
I just ate it. We weren't a wealthy family. My guardian was a school teacher, and I don't know how she afforded to keep me. And she was a very generous person. She supported two people in Africa, old people, and 2 children in Africa on a teacher's salary, and brought me up. She didn't go to church, but she was a very Christian lady.
Yeah. Could you tell us more about her?
Well, she was a maiden lady, and she taught in the school in Llangefni, which was the one of the 2 secondary schools on Anglesey. And then there must have been so many pupils that they started another secondary school in Amlwch in the Memorial Hall. It wasn't purpose-built, but the war years were spent there. She taught there until she retired.
Could you tell us a little bit about the Czech school you went to when you got to Wales?
Well, we had a wonderful time at school. Learning was difficult because all the lessons were in Czech, and of course I'd forgotten. I hadn't spoken Czech for several years, and when I came to England I was bilingual. I could speak Czech and German, but I couldn't speak German because I'd forgotten it, and I don't speak it to this day. And Czech, I'd gone to the Czech school to relearn. So lessons were difficult because of the not knowing the language well. And by the last year, my reports began to be better because I could understand what was going on. The only lessons I could truly say I found easy were English. Because my guardian was an English teacher, and I suppose she taught me quite well. She actually taught me in school. But we had a very happy time. We used to play a lot of table tennis, and there used to be a lake when we moved down to Breconshire, and there used to be boats there which were out of bounds, but you know what kids are. We used to get into the rowing boats and go round the water, the 2 little islands. And we used to play volleyball, and we used to generally do all the things children do. And the food was pretty good. And we had, after the war, we had several reunions until people became too old. And we used to meet mostly down in the Abernant Lake Hotel in Breconshire. But one day we went from the reunion down there, we all got onto a coach and we went to Hinton Hall, where we'd first gone to school. And the people had come back from the war. They were farmers, and they needed their huge house back again. And it was very sad because the place had fallen to rack and ruin, and they could only use 1 or 2 rooms, and they were very old. But I think one of them had a birthday. We took a birthday cake along, I remember that. But yeah, they were very happy school days, I have to say. We're still, my special friend lives in Canada now, and, we keep in touch, yeah.
Were you able to connect with the Jewish community when you came to Wales?
No. I had no connection with the Jewish community, and then when I came to Birmingham for many years, I went around various churches and tried different churches, and then I said to myself, how stupid, just look up the synagogue telephone number, and I did, and I went along to see them. And I just felt I'd come home. But along the way, I hadn't met any Jewish people. Nobody suggested I went there. So I was in my 30s by the time I went back to my faith. So, and we still belong. We have a beautiful synagogue in town. And if we have, each year, we have an open day. And we also have the Lord Mayor's Day, and when all the dignitaries come. If ever you wanted to come, just get in touch with me and I'll take you along. But it's a beautiful building inside. It's a cathedral synagogue, and it is a we've actually only 2 years ago where we renovated, and the chief rabbi came to consecrate it all again, and it's really lovely now.
Could you tell us what it was like settling into life in Wales, adjusting from coming from Czechoslovakia?
I found it quite easy. We lived in a bungalow up these 2 fields, and we had no running water, we had no electricity, we had no gas. I went to bed with a candle. If there was no rain, the one tank didn't have water in it. We used to have to go down the garden to the toilet. And then you just acclimatise to what's thrown at you. And I used to go to the well with 2 buckets, fill them up and walk along the lane and up 2 fields. And it was just a way of life. You soon get used to it. I mean, if you live in Africa, you do far worse than that. And then eventually we had Calagas, then we got electricity, and now the people that live there now, they're double glazed, and in fact we're going to stay next month in the Easter holidays. One of my daughters and her husband, the 2 boys, and ourselves, we're going to stay at Heatherbank, and it's now a holiday cottage. So I'm going back to my original home, which is now centrally heated, double glazed, and has running water. So that'll be very different.
Yeah. So just for my records, you live there with your Posey, did you say her name? Mouse. And did she have any children as well?
No. She did marry. Have you heard of Barbara Mullen? No, she was an actress. And her father was Pat Mullen, and he lived on the Arran Isles off the west coast of Galway. And she and her sister went there one day after a storm, and he was with his pony and trap on Inishmore, which is one of the big islands, and she saw him and she fell in love. And at that time he was married, but he'd lived apart from his wife for many, many years, and because he was a Catholic, until his wife died. They couldn't get married. So he lived on the Iron Isles and she lived in Bull Bay. But it all ended happily. After the war ended, I went back and finished my education at the local grammar school in Amlwch. And I never did my A-levels because I knew I wanted to nurse, and I didn't think it would help me to do nursing, which I regretted subsequently. But there weren't, at the local school, there were not facilities to do A-levels. They were just going to start the following academic year, and I was all fixed up then. I didn't want to change all my plans, so I never did my A-levels.
When did you decide to become a nurse, or when you found out you wanted to become a nurse?
Ooh, I think I must have been quite young, 13, 14, something like that. Yeah. So I always knew that I wanted to do that.
Yeah. So at what point did you decide to come to Birmingham to continue nursing or learn how to nurse?
Well, my guardian's sister, Aunt Meg, had been a patient at the Queen Elizabeth, and she was a trained nurse and health visitor, and she thought it was a good place to go. So I did, and we had a very happy time. Yeah.
So how did you prepare for that move to come to Birmingham?
Well, it was just the next move, really. You knew you had to make a living and to fulfill your wishes to become a nurse. And I just took it in my stride, really, like we all did. And we had a very happy time training. And the training lasts 3 years, and you spent so long on the wards and so long in the nursing school each year until you qualified.
Did you come over to Birmingham by yourself, or did you come with someone?
No, I came by myself. And I can remember travelling from Bull Bay each time I came back after a holiday. And I used to have these egg sandwiches in a packet. I used to love eating my sandwiches on the train. And Mouse had a friend in Chester that used to be on the station to put me on to the next train. Because I was only a kid, I was about 12. And, I was a bit young to be travelling on my own over a long distance. So that was the only help I had, really. And I really don't remember what happened the other end. I don't suppose I had a taxi, but I don't suppose I had too much luggage, so I just took myself off to school. Yeah.
Where did you stay when you first got to Birmingham?
Oh, in the nurse's home. It was very simple in those days. When you were in training, you all stayed in the nurse's home. And it's really, I don't know whether nurses in training now are allowed to live out, but we certainly weren't. We did have to live in the nurse's home until we qualified. Yeah. I can remember when I first of all started doing my nursery nurses training, I used to earn, I think it was about £2.99 a month. But you had your board and lodging. So, and I can remember saving money for my first blouse from Marks and Spencer's, which I had for many years. And my second big purchase was a pair of shoes.
Do you remember what that blouse looked like?
Yes, it was blue and white check.
Do you have any first impressions from Birmingham when you first got here?
Wow, it was huge. Just the size of it, when you were brought up in the country. Everything was an adventure, just to catch a bus into Birmingham from 5 ways, really. I don't think there was a local. You had to change in 5 ways to get into the city centre. Used to be a 2B bus, I can remember. Yeah. It's very different now.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it changed over the years?
Birmingham.
Yes.
Well, mainly the building, especially around the Bull Ring, Symphony Hall. It's still going on in a big way. And travelling in Birmingham, if you're coming from Harborne or Edgbaston, is quite difficult. And it's going to take another 2 years, I believe, in front of the Symphony Hall and the Repertory Theatre before they finish building. It's really very difficult.
Yeah. Could you tell us how you feel about the current migration patterns in the UK and the Birmingham area?
About the
current migration patterns?
Well, as long as people can find employment, things are very difficult because you've got economic migrants and you've got people that are escaping from bloodshed, and they come to save their lives, and then you have people that want a better life, and you can understand both. But in a way, I think the people that are fleeing for because their country is in conflict and are coming to Birmingham, I'm glad that we're able to help them.
Could you tell us a little bit about the Jewish community in Birmingham?
Yes. There are very Orthodox Jews. At the other end of Spectre. Thank you. At the other end of the spectre, you get progressive Judaism. And I go to Singers Hill, which is an Orthodox synagogue, but I've got friends in all the synagogues. And I think how you worship and where you go is your own business, and you go either where your family went before you or what suits you, your beliefs. And it's a very personal thing, I think.
Do you have any memories? You said you came back to your faith in your 30s. Are there any memories of holidays that you got to celebrate again at that time?
How?
Holidays or religious ceremonies?
Oh, in the night before I came to England.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we weren't a very observant family. I can only remember going to synagogue, high days and holy days, like the Day of Atonement and New Year, and there's a festival of Purim and Hanukkah, but I don't remember going to the synagogue regularly. Now we'd try and go regularly, and of course, because we've got grandchildren, they go to our synagogue as well. We try. We set a good example, I hope. But we're a very happy community, and we all help each other along, and we look after the old people, and generally there's quite a good social program. There's a good learning program, and we do a lot of charity work. Generally, yes, it's a happy community, but sadly it's shrinking very much. And it's mainly, most of the old people are here. The younger people tend to go off to university, and very often they don't come back to Birmingham, because there's more Jewish life in London and Manchester, but all the other communities are shrinking.
So can you tell us about the program set up by the English government that sent children from the area you're from into the UK?
At this time, or?
The one you came on.
Well, we were very fortunate because this country was the only country that allowed up to 10,000 children in, and other countries refused. The only thing they said, the government said, was that a sum of money of £50 had to be provided, so when hostilities ceased, the children can be repatriated to their own countries. But in my case, I stayed here forever because my parents and all my family had perished.
So was it just Jewish children brought over with the program, or were there other children as well?
I would think they were a mixture. The list that I've got a list upstairs of all the children that went to the Czech school. But all the children in the Czech school were not Jewish. Some of their parents did not believe in the Nazi regime, and they had to get out because of the work they did. Maybe they worked for the government or they worked for the newspapers, and if they'd written anything that was inflammatory in any way, they had to get out, otherwise they would have been rounded up. But certainly when I went to the Czech schools, we had teachers that were soldiers. The headmaster was a soldier, and he used to drill the oldest boys used to be in the a military, not the ATS, but something like that, the equivalent for the men, and he used to drill them, which was probably quite healthy for them. But we did have quite a lot of teachers that were soldiers and had to get out.
Soldiers from where? Can you clarify?
They were from Czechoslovakia. Yes, Czech soldiers.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your parents' occupation?
My mother owned a shop, sort of a haberdasher's, and my father was a commercial traveller.
What's a commercial traveller?
When you travel around different shops trying to sell goods, I'm not sure what exactly what firm he worked for and what he was trying to sell. I really don't know that. The refugees, because I was helped at my time of need. I appreciate that we've had a lot of immigration over the years, and there are local people that can't get work, and I don't know whether things are going to change now we're leaving the common market. I just don't know what's going to happen. But generally, I'd obviously like people that are in trouble to be helped as much as possible. I know that in Birmingham, I think there are quite a lot of Syrian refugees. And I know once a month we have a tea for the refugees who, I think they live in the YW in Stone Road, and they come up to the Progressive Synagogue, and I try and help on a Sunday once a month, and they come. There are young men, there are women with children, and they walk up from Stone Lane, and we give them tea and games for the children and try and help them.
So
money's collected as well, yeah.
So Sudetenland no longer exists technically as an area. So where do you consider home? Where do you consider home?
This country, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yes, I have been back to Czechoslovakia several times. But I definitely consider this country my home, because I only lived 8 years in Czechoslovakia, and I've lived here, golly, 78 years, something like that. So I definitely consider this country my home.
So, what does it mean to be a Brummie? Do you know what that is?
Oh, of course I know. Well, like everywhere else, you get friendly Brummies, you get unfriendly Brummies, and of course they have an accent, and some people pick it up and some people don't. But it just shows where they come from, and yes, I personally think they're very nice people. And like any part of the world, there's a mixture. And now, because of immigration, it's so multicultural, very, very multicultural. And in fact, as a white person, sometimes you're especially around here, there are a lot of Asian people, and you're in the minority. But there are certain parts that of this country, like Anglesey, there are very few Asian people, except they seem to make very good news agents. And even in Amlwch, where I was brought up, the news agent is Asian. But I think it's in large cities that people tend to be more multicultural. And I think it's a good thing. And I think Birmingham, I think there's a very, the leaders of the various churches and synagogues, they have meetings, and you hear very little anti-Semitism or anti-anything in Birmingham, I think, compared to other places. Don't you think?
Would you say you consider Birmingham a welcoming place?
Well, it's certainly welcoming to me. Yeah, I think people vary. It depends on your expectations and where you happen to land, really. Whether I mean, round here, we're all very neighbourly, and we're very multicultural. We're all human beings, and it's up to us to help each other and to get on. When you're nursing, it's to begin with, you get very little social life because the hours was whilst you're training. At the Queen Elizabeth, some shifts, you got off at 11:15 at night, and you were on duty at 7 o'clock in the morning. So you can imagine you didn't have much energy left at the end of the second day. And definitely, I don't know what it's like now, but your social life is very limited when you're in nursing.
Did you make a lot of or any friends while you were in nursing school?
Not so much during my training, because people came from different parts of the country. We did have reunions, but they've stopped now on account of people's age. But we still have reunions. We've just finished having reunions for the Queen Elizabeth School of Nursing. We had our last one last year in October, but there are a few of us that are going to meet this year again, but just a few of us, but it's a private arrangement because unfortunately people are getting older and there are not so many people around. Yeah. I have personal friends that from family planning days and also from my nursing days that they come here for coffee, and but nothing arranged by the different schools. It's just a personal friendships. That's all.
Do you remember any special places that you might have gone to eat in your early days in Birmingham or your leisure activities?
Well, I used to go to a club called Coffee Pot, but that was latterly, really. And it was a club for professional people, and we actually met in the YMCA in Stone Road, and once a week. And we used to do all sorts of things. We used to play tennis, table tennis, we used to go to the theatre, we used to have weekends away. We went away as a crowd. But that's pretty well all the social life that I can remember having in Birmingham at that time.
How did you find the Coffee Pot Club?
How did I I think somebody must have told me about it. And a colleague and I went, and we really enjoyed it. We enjoyed having these communal activities, you know, and I actually met my husband there, which of course made it really rather nice.
Do you remember what your first meeting was like?
First time I went to, well, you know, any time you go first time anywhere, it's all a bit strange, isn't it? Yeah. But people were very friendly and welcoming, and needless to say, we drank coffee and had biscuits and stuff. I tried to join in as much as I could with the hours that I worked. And of course, when I became a ward sister, it was a little bit easier because I actually was a ward sister when I went down there. So I'd been nursing for quite a number of years before I joined the club.
How old were you when you became a ward sister?
I think I must have been about 25, something like that, yeah. Because my first job was night duty, and I was night sister at the General on casualty, and then in the main hospital. And then I had various wards until I left to get married.
Could you tell us about that first job you had when you came to Birmingham?
The
first job you had?
My nurse's training. I went around various places, different nurseries, and some were day nurseries, some were 24-hour residential nurseries. And they were jolly hard work because you did everything for the children. You fed them, you got them up out of bed. You had all these little tweenies, as they were called, on their potties, poor things. You got them out of their cots, stuck them on their potties. They were all hopping round on their little potties. And so they didn't wet anything, you know, poor things were just put on. And then you'd get them dressed and you'd feed them and you'd take them out for walks. You looked after them all day, but not only did you look after the children, you had to do all the cleaning as well. You used to sweep and polish and wash. We were well fed, and we were well provided for, but I worked extremely hard at that time because it just was a hard work, you know. Well, you know, I don't know whether either you have children, but it's hard work looking after children and being responsible for them. And it wasn't just one child, you know. There were several of you, but you know, you used to have a report and you were told what to do that day. And well, from the moment you got on duty to the time you were left, you were working all the time. But it's lovely working with children because you never know what they're going to say next. I actually wanted to be a children's nurse, but during your general training, you do 3 months of the children's, and I just couldn't come to terms with children not getting better. And some of those parents were wonderful, you know. I had parents comforting me rather than me comforting parents, because I used to get so upset. Yes. And funnily enough, one of my guardian sisters, Aunt Doff, the youngest, she started her training at the Children's Hospital in Birmingham, but she picked up everything that was going in the hospital, so in the end she had to leave, which was very sad. She would have made a wonderful nurse.
When you say she picked up everything in the hospital, can you clarify what you meant by that?
Well, the thing that really is she got TB glands, and then she had to leave.
Go ahead.
My very special thanks must go to Mouse for taking me in and giving me such a happy childhood. She brought me up in a loving home, but always bore in mind that my parents might be alive and I might then return to Czechoslovakia. When I found out that my parents had perished in the Holocaust, Heatherbank became my permanent home. Mouse was very happily married in late life and lived to be 95. We were all very happy. My adoptive cousins and I remain very close and share family occasions. Somewhere was it? We owe a great debt of gratitude to the British government for allowing Jewish children into this country at a time of dire need, thus saving our lives.